Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. And also, the Search for the Ancient Bauble Kickstarter has launched, so make sure you go check that out. The Kickstarter campaign will last for 30 days, and after that, the playmat will no longer be available for purchase. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, not too long ago, I did an episode on the most powerful Strixhaven commanders. Out of all the commanders in this set, I ranked them in comparison to each other, from the D tier, which is the lowest, to the S tier, which is the highest. And a lot of you seem to really enjoy that format in that episode, so with Modern Horizons 2 right around the corner, I'm going to be doing a tier ranking of the most powerful Modern Horizons commanders. Modern Horizons was chock full of a lot of fantastic cards for Commander, and the commanders themselves are no exception. And just a quick disclaimer before we get started, these picks are 100% based off of my own opinions. So your opinion on these commanders' power levels might differ, and that's okay. And also, since these picks are from my perspective and I'm a casual player, a CDH list might be different. There might be a combo or a type of build that's incredibly effective with a certain commander, but in a casual environment, you might not see that type of build. So again, like the Strixhaven episode, I'm going to be ranking these commanders in comparison to each other. Essentially, for their power levels, I'm considering them within the vacuum of just the original Modern Horizons. So, say a D tier in Modern Horizons might be more powerful than a D tier in Strixhaven, and that's okay. And with all that said, let's jump into it. So first up, let's start with the lowest tier, which is the D tier, and just a quick note, the commanders within each tier are not in any particular order. So within each tier, just because I talk about one commander before after another one, it doesn't mean that it's more powerful or less powerful. And the first and only commander at this tier is Ayula, Queen Among Bears. I am so sorry, Ayula. You might be queen among the bears, but you're definitely not queen when it comes to power rankings in Modern Horizons. Ayula is a 2/2 bear for 1 and a green. She has whenever another bear enters the battlefield on your control, choose one. Put 2++1 counters on target bear, or target bear you control fights target creature you don't control. So Ayula gives you a choice and additional value for whenever you get a bear into play. The only problem is, well, there aren't many bears out there. When it comes to actual tribal support, bears is definitely one that is pretty lacking. For a deck built around Ayula, you've only got access to 24 other bears. And to put it kindly, many of those bears are, well, let's just say subpar. A lot of 2/2s for 2s and bears out there. And there actually aren't many other cards that either mention bears or make bear tokens either. So the deck kind of builds itself, and it's a very limited deck in its scope. Now, yes, you can use changelings, but again, you don't really have access to too many of those either. On top of that, you really don't have too many ways to use and abuse this ability. If you were in, say, blue or white, you've got access to blink spells, so you can take advantage of that ETB trigger. Now, I know that Ayula is a favorite of many, being essentially the first bear tribal commander. Or at least I should say a bear tribal commander that is an actual bear. Though I believe Goreclaw was the very first legendary creature bear, it was not a bear in that it was a 4/3 instead of a 2/2. Just in case you don't know, in Magic slang, a 2/2 is also referred to as a bear. Regardless, if Ayula had more tribal support, things could be different. But at this point, the deck kinda builds itself, and it's not really all that powerful of a deck. Because again, you're heavily dependent and heavily reliant on creatures that are, well, underwhelming. There are only so many bears out there, and the majority of them are pretty weak in Commander. So unfortunately at this point, Ayula, although you are queen among bears, you have definitely earned your solo spot in the D tier. But now that we finished with the D tier, let's move on to the fourth most powerful tier, which is going to be the C tier. I guess I should say fourth most powerful or second weakest tier. So in the C tier, the first commander that I want to bring up is another tribal commander with Pashlik Mons. Pashlik Mons is a 2/2 goblin warrior for 2 and a red. It has whenever it or another goblin you control dies, Pashlik Mons deals 1 damage to any target. And by paying 3 and a red, you sacrifice a goblin to create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Now, I just want to make this point clear before moving forward on this one. In comparison to other goblin commanders, Pashlik Mons is very underwhelming. I mean, a more popular goblin commander out there isn't even a goblin with Purphoros God of the Forge, which has almost twice as many decks. So yeah, that tells you something about the power level of Pashlik Mons. Pinging something for 1 damage is decent, but not all that great. And the ability to sacrifice a goblin to make 2/1/1 goblins is good, but it's overcosted at 4 mana. Now, power level wise, Pashlik Mons would probably be on the exact same level as Ayula except for one key difference. Whereas Ayula has almost no tribal support in bears, Pashlik Mons has a ton of tribal support in goblins. There are an absurd number of goblins out there, and you've got a lot of fantastic ones to pick from. So although Pashlik Mons itself might be underpowered, if you get someone like Franco out into play, it's gonna work out fine. Again, in comparison to other goblin commanders, especially ones like Franco, Pashlik Mons is underpowered. But in comparison to other tribes, goblins have access to a lot of great cards. So that's the reason that Ayula ended up in the D tier and Pashlik Mons ended up in the C tier. But now it's time for us to move on to a completely different commander with Hogak Arisen Necropolis. Hogak is an 8/8 avatar that costs 5 Golgari, but you can't spend mana to cast this spell. It has Convoke and Delve, and you may cast it from your graveyard, and it's got Trample. So this is an 8/8 with Trample that you can keep getting back over and over again from your graveyard, but you've got to get it back without spending mana to cast it. And the 2 things that can help you cast it are Convoke and Delve. Essentially, you can tap creatures and exile cards from your graveyard to pay for its cost. Now, Hogak is an incredibly powerful card in the right format. In fact, it's so powerful in Modern that it was banned. But this is definitely the type of commander where you are heavily dependent on things going in the right direction for it to work. And in comparison to other commanders, the payoff isn't really all that great. An 8/8 with Trample is powerful, but in Commander there are much more powerful things out there. And with that dependency on convoking and delving to be able to cast it, you could get shut out from actually casting your commander. If your opponents are running a decent amount of graveyard hate, you can say goodbye to your graveyard and the ability to delve it. And if someone casts a Wrath, you can say goodbye to the creatures that you've got in play and the ability to convoke it. So Hogak could just be stuck in your command zone or in your graveyard and your deck could stall from there. Now, yes, when things are working correctly, you can do a lot of powerful things with this commander. Since you can keep recasting it from your graveyard, you can sacrifice it and get it back and get a lot of value out of things like Greater Good. But again, you're heavily dependent on getting set up to actually get your commander out in the first place, and then after that, you're dependent on your opponents not stopping you. I mean, something as simple as a 0-mana Tormod's Crypt could be the absolute bane of this deck. So again, because of all these factors, Hogak has ended up in the C tier. It's not the least powerful commander in this set, but it's definitely not one of the strongest. But now that we finished up with the C tier, let's move on to the middle of the road tier with the B tier. In comparison to some of the other commanders in this list, they are much more powerful than some, but much less powerful than others still. And first off, let's start with the ultimate tribal commander out there, the 5-color sensation itself, Morophon the Boundless. Morophon is a 6/6 shapeshifter with changeling, so it's every creature type, and it costs 7. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and spells the chosen type you cast cost Wooburg less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana you pay. And then other creatures you control the chosen type get +1/+1. So Morophon is essentially the go-to tribal commander for tribes that either don't have a commander or want access to all 5 colors and don't have a commander that gives them that. Once it's in play, it helps your tribe out in 2 different ways. First off, it can reduce the cost of your creature spells by quite a bit. It can reduce the cost of a lot of your creatures by 1 or 2, or all the way up to 5. So if you've got a creature that costs Wooburg in your hand and it's the creature type you chose, congratulations, you can just put it in play. So yeah, your mana savings can be huge throughout the game. And on top of that, this acts as a nice little anthem for your creatures as well. So yeah, there's a reason why Morophon sees so much play. Currently, it's got over 3,000 decks on EDH Rec, and it's the 21st most popular commander out there. It gives tribes like Eldrazi that might not have access to a 5-color commander the access to all 5 colors. So you can essentially stuff all the best Eldrazi and other spells in your deck. And there are also some pretty crazy and unique builds that you can do with this commander as well. On one of my recent episodes, I showed off my newest Mad Lad deck. This type of deck is really off the wall, and it utilizes Morophon in a way that it really isn't ever utilized in. Again, Morophon decks tend to be tribal decks, but this one is completely tribeless. And when I say tribeless, I basically mean that there isn't a consistent tribe in the deck, and essentially there are very few creatures that actually match up when it comes to their tribe. Now, I'm not going to spoil exactly what the deck does and why Morophon is the perfect commander for it, so if you want to see that, make sure you check it out. Just know that Morophon can be an incredibly flexible and powerful commander. So that's why it ended up in the B tier. But next up in the B tier, let's move on to yet another 5-color commander with Sisay, Weatherlight Captain. Sisay is a 2/2 human soldier for 2 and a white. She gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control. And by paying Wooburg, you search your library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So yeah, Sisay is a commander that can grow in power throughout the game and can help you tutor out some incredibly powerful things. Essentially, if you build a legendary tribal deck around her with just a bunch of great legendary cards in it, she's gonna be pretty effective. The more things that you get in play, the bigger things that you can tutor out, and yeah, things can get out of control. Essentially, with every color in play, she's a 7/7, and then you can tutor out anything that costs 6 or less. And if you want other ways to pump her, like say a Blackblade Reforged, you can go tutor that out, get it in play, attach it to her, and she's even more powerful. So she can be a toolbox commander that can get you a lot of powerful things. And like Morophon, she can be utilized in a lot of unique and exciting ways. And Annie and I actually talked about one of those ways in our Spicy Decks episode. Our friend Alec has an absolutely epic deck built around Sisay, Weatherlight Captain that utilizes, well, the epic spells. So if you want to learn about that deck and see me cry on camera while eating spicy foods, make sure you check that episode out. But yeah, Sisay is a fantastic commander, and again, like Morophon, she gives you access to all 5 colors, which is great in Commander. And now that we finished up with the B tier, it's time for us to move on to the A tier. The A tier is the second most powerful tier, second only to the S tier. And the first commander that I want to bring up in this tier is the First Sliver. The First Sliver is yet another 5-color commander, and yeah, looking back on Modern Horizons, we got quite a few of them in this set. It's a 7/7 sliver with Cascade that costs white, blue, black, red, green, or in other words, Wooburg. And it says, sliver spells you cast have Cascade. So, cascading means that when you cast a spell, you exile cards in the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, then you put the exile cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Basically, cast it, get something else smaller off the top of your library for free. And not only does the First Sliver actually cascade for you, but now all your sliver spells cascade. Which means that things can get really out of hand, especially with slivers. Slivers are a tribe that heavily benefit you for having more and more of them in play. They either pump all your slivers or give them all abilities, etc, etc. And perhaps the best of these abilities is actually the First Slivers itself by giving all your things cascade. Because, for example, let's say you cast a sliver that costs 5 mana. You cascade and reveal cards off the top of your library, and now let's say that you reveal a sliver that costs 4. Then you cast that, and then that cascades. And you keep going and going and going. So yeah, things can get out of control in absolutely no time with this commander. Now with this commander especially, I want to reiterate my disclaimer from the beginning of this episode. This power ranking tier list is based off of my own opinions, which are from the perspective of a casual player. From my understanding of CEDH, this is an incredibly powerful commander, in fact one of the most powerful commanders in all of CEDH. Again though, this is not a competitive list. So although it might be top tier when it comes to competitive decks, in my opinion in casual decks it is not quite top tier. It's close, again it is A tier, but in my opinion it is not S tier in Modern Horizons. And speaking of close but not quite there, let's talk about Yawgmoth Rand Physician. Yawgmoth is a 2/4 human cleric with protection from humans that costs 2 black. He has pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and draw a card. On top of that, you can pay black to discard a card to proliferate. Yawgmoth is an incredibly powerful commander. He is a commander that is a free sacrifice outlet that provides you card advantage. Now, yes, technically it's not free because you do have to pay life, but again, in Commander, life is a resource that you've got a lot of. When I say free sacrifice outlet, I mean it's free in terms that you don't need to pay mana for it. So you can sacrifice creature after creature after creature, drawing more and more cards in your deck, and then making more creatures, and so on and so forth. And of course, with an aristocrat-style deck, once you're set up, you're going to be getting even more value when you sacrifice those creatures. You can draw more cards, make more tokens, gain more life, etc, etc. And that's not even mentioning that when you do sacrifice creatures, you can put a -1/-1 counter on a creature. So you can utilize this to take out your opponent's creatures, and you can especially utilize it when you start discarding cards to proliferate. But on top of using this to take out your opponent's creatures, you can actually use this to go infinite with your own. If you've got 2 creatures that have Undying, you essentially can just sacrifice them as many times as you want. Because when a creature with Undying dies, it comes back into play with a +1 counter on it. And Yawgmoth can cancel that counter out with a -1/-1 counter. So yeah, with minor setup, you can go infinite and just win. If you've got, say, a Zulaport Cutthroat in play, you can just drain out your opponents and they lose. So yeah, Yawgmoth is a free sacrifice outlet that can generate you a ton of card advantage and can proliferate and can go infinite in the right situation. And if it wasn't for the commander that's actually in the S tier, this one probably would be. So now that we finished off with the A tier, it's time for us to move to the top of the list, the cream of the crop with the S tier. Only the most powerful kind of commander gets the distinction of an S tier commander. And this commander has earned that distinction and then some. Because the only commander from Modern Horizons in the S tier is Urza, Lord High Artificer. Urza is a 1/4 human artificer that costs 2 blue. He has, when he enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets ++1 for each artifact you control. Tap an untapped artifact you control, add blue. And pay 5, shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. So Urza does a ton of things, and all of them are fantastic. The most impactful of all these, though, is that it says tap an untapped artifact you control, add blue. Essentially, it turns all of your artifacts into mana rocks. And because the ability is actually on Urza and he's not just giving it to your artifact creatures can actually just tap right away for mana. So Urza comes into play, makes you an artifact creature that can get absolutely huge throughout the game, and first off, you can just tap it for mana. And with all your other artifacts being able to tap for mana, that's already ridiculous. But on top of that, Urza gives you the ability to dump mana into a fantastic effect. Just pay 5 mana, shuffle your library, and get something off the top for free. Now that might be a small artifact, but it could also be a giant Eldrazi or whatever you want to put in this deck. And in fact, that's kind of what makes Urza incredibly overpowered. You could probably just chuck random artifacts in this deck, and an Urza deck is still going to be incredibly effective even with random artifacts. Any 0 mana artifact is now essentially a Mox Sapphire, which is a banned card in Commander. You can produce absurd amounts of mana in a deck like this. And with things like Dramatic Reversal, you can untap your artifacts and tap them again for mana and cast giant spells or just keep activating Urza. When it comes to the most overpowered commanders of all time, Urza is definitely in that discussion. So yeah, in terms of the power rankings for Modern Horizons, Urza has definitely earned the distinction of the S tier on his own. So although commanders like the First Sliver and Yawgmoth are incredibly powerful, they pale in comparison to Urza. But now as this show is wrapping up, it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, please let me know what your thoughts on my power rankings are. What commanders do you think that I overrated or underrated in this list? And as always, thanks again and have a good one.